as we were drifting, I think back, one more day. You know, what my mother had to endure, one more day. As we were dying in front of her, the ulcers growing on our legs, my mother, her strength, one more day. When people were dying, she held on to one more day. My name is LAM. I am the CEO and founder of RONIN TACTICS, where my wife and I, we travel around the United States. We teach law-abiding citizens, we teach military and law enforcement. We've been doing this for 7 years. There's nothing more important in life as a warrior to be stronger than the conditions and circumstances that are presented to us. You know, Nietzsche, the philosopher, once said that chaos is needed in oneself to give way to a dancing star. Without chaos, there will be no armies to fight, no mountains to climb or dragons to slay. Without chaos, there will be no realization to one's actual truth. You see, I was born in chaos. I was born on a cold cement floor in the basement Saigon Hospital. My mother shielded my body from incoming artillery fire in the morning of my birth. At this stage of the war, American troops had left Vietnam, and I was born on the losing side of the war, a war between communism and democracy. Democracy lost. The communists, they imposed their ideologies on us. At 3 months old, I lost my freedoms, I lost my country. We lived underneath communist occupation. My uncles that served alongside Americans were immediately brought out to re-education camps. These were torture camps. Any person that fell ill, hurt, injured from these hard labor camps were brought out into the jungles and quietly murdered. You know, my uncles that served alongside them were imprisoned. And by the time we received them in the States, had no skin on the bottom of their foot, defeated, broken. See, the communists seek to impose their ideals on us, and they broke us as human beings. We escaped genocide when I was 3 years old on an overstuffed wooden fishing boat with hundreds of thousands of other fleeing refugees. At that time, refugees were escaping when Americans left through government planes, any planes that they can get their hands on, helicopters. Some walked out to neighboring countries, and we were the boat people. There was an estimated 400,000 refugees died at sea. But yet on this night, my mother loaded us in the basement of this wooden boat. What was supposed to be a 2-day trip from Vietnam to Malaysia, a route that's often taken. You know, they, in order to fit more refugees on, they took water and food, supplies off the boats to put more bodies so more refugees can escape. It was such a lucrative business to stop the fleeing refugees, to board the boats and to kill the men, to rape the women and enslave the children. It was such a lucrative business that they brought in neighboring countries, pirates. It was estimated that many refugees died at sea because of these bandits. Somehow, under the cover of darkness, we escaped the pirates and we made our way into Malaysia, where the Malaysian Coast Guard stopped us at gunpoint, shot at us, boarded our boats, roped the line, and pulled us back out into the South China Sea, further and further into the sea, into hopelessness. When there was no more hope, then they cut the rope. Then they shot our engine, and they left us there to die. What turned out to be a 2-day trip, we drifted. My mother said that we roughly were out at sea for 30 days. The lack of food and water, people died, suffered. It's common practice amongst fleeing refugees to carry poison in their belongings. The poison was to minister to their child so they would not endure a life of slavery, torture. You know, I think back to my mother as we were dying on this boat, drifting, dying. Bodies were being thrown overboard. 3 years old, can you believe it? As we were drifting, I think back, one more day. You know, what my mother had to endure, one more day. As we were dying in front of her, the ulcers growing on our legs. My mother, her strength, one more day. When people were dying, she held on to one more day. Well, she didn't poison us, and we got caught up in a storm, huge tropical storm. She said this storm was so fierce that we should have been capsized on this small little wooden fishing boat. Further and further we drift, she said the waves were so massive, and she was prepared for death that night. But somehow the storm washes further out into the South China Sea. And the next day, when the storm broke, we were drifting. And somehow this storm led us into a path, the lat-long coordinates of a Russian supply boat, South China Sea. Can you imagine how big that ocean is? Somehow this storm led us into this path of this Russian supply boat. Now, you know, the Russians, their ideology, the communism was what took us out of our country. We lost our freedoms, our country, we were escaping genocide. But yet this Russian boat didn't look at us as the enemy. They chose humanity, and they saved us. We were barely alive. One by one, they took us onto their boats, gave us the medical treatment. And after a day, they put us back on our wooden fishing boat. The smell, the foul smell of urine, feces, hopelessness. We went back into these basements. Our captain, my mother said this, said thank you to the captain of the Russian supply boat. And he said that, don't thank me. Because if I would have spotted you going into Vietnam, I would have drugged you back into Vietnam. But since you're here, I'm bounded to save you. I think that lesson, you know, when I hear that lesson, because I was too young to really remember it, you know. But that lesson, as I reflect through the years, is this. No matter what culture, what country, there's always a good and there's always a bad, right? And that we shouldn't look at one another, culture, color, background, saying you're the enemy. We should look at each other with humanity. And that's what they did. And I was taught that at a very young age, the lesson in humanity. They roped us back in and they pulled us into Indonesia. You know, my mother said there's, you know, Indonesia's a multiple chain of islands, you know. They pulled us into Indonesia and they docked us, and she said, you know, in the end processing process, she said that people died of dehydration on the beach. Can you imagine? Surviving that and dying on the beach when all they had to do is show compassion to us. You know. My mother said that the Indonesian guards showed no compassion as we sat there on the beach, 100 plus degrees, can you imagine? After 30 days at sea, depleted, dying. And yeah, here we are at safety, but yet a human being cannot even show humanity, can't even save a person that almost died. And all they had to do is give them water. But yet we wait on this beach. And then finally we in-process the refugee camps. Let me explain to you the refugee camps. Hundreds and thousands of people are in these refugee camps. Stripped from dignity, country, stripped from everything. With the good, there's the bad. Amongst us, there's people that seek to take, murder, kill in the refugee camps. A safe haven for refugees. Yet they're drug out into the jungles, raped, killed by bandits in the jungles, dead bodies. You know, my brother, because these refugee camps, people, let me explain, these refugee camps are grass huts in the middle of a jungle. You survive on your own. You know, so we had to get, firewood. And my brother, was a little older than I was at the refugee camps, and he reminded me growing up, he reminded me how many dead bodies there were around these refugee camps. Young boy, picking up firewood, seeing dead bodies. We endured these refugee camps. We had to do what we had to do to survive in these refugee camps. During the war, during the escape, my grandfather asked my mother, if you were to survive this escape, there's a slim to no chance, but if you were to survive this escape, I want you to promise me that you would do everything you can to become an American. You see, during the Vietnam War, an American Special Forces Green Beret officer, he was fighting the war, and his G base, a camp, Special Forces camp, with commandos, got overran by the North Vietnamese. Overran. Everybody died. They ran behind my uncle as he was fighting, and they stabbed him with an SKS bayonet into his lungs. He was medevaced out, and he made it to Saigon Hospital, where my grandfather would come to visit because my aunt met this American Special Forces officer. She nursed him to life. And then the thing was, my grandfather said there's no way that he would make it. He would die. Yep, this Green Beret made it. And he married my aunt. We took her back to the States. So my grandfather asked my mother, if we can, we must unite with your sister in America, the land of the free. And this Special Forces man, a hero. You need to reunite with him. He's a good person. And America is the land of the free. Promise me this. And my mother said, I promise. So she held on for a year and a half. A year and a half, can you believe it? We live in these refugee camps for a year and a half because of a promise. She said other countries accept this. Australia, New Zealand, Canada, she's named off a few. But yet she held on to a promise. When people were dying, suffering, she held on to this promise, So after a year and a half, my uncle finally sponsored the paperwork for us to get to America. It was very difficult at that time to get to America. The refugee process. We came to North Carolina, Fayetteville, North Carolina, right outside Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which is the home of the biggest special operations base in all of America. More commandos there than walks the face of America. One central location, the training grounds of the Green Beret Special Forces. See, I went there because my uncle was Special Forces. He was this officer, and he was going through his command. So we lived in this, I remember this, we lived in this home officer quarters. And I tell you, man, I never lived in such comfort. I never ate a meal every day, you know? So this was new for me. And I remember I walked down this hallway. You know, he had all his military accomplishments. Green Beret. I remember looking at all of it and just admiring how warrior that was. Didn't know what a warrior was at that time, you know. It's only 6. So eventually we moved out. You know, my father, my mother, my brother and I. And we moved into a very poor part of town. And we lived in a very small apartment, and the only furniture that we had was one used full-size mattress. None of our classmates or friends can even go there. We didn't have any, but nobody was invited because we were embarrassed. And they worked so hard, my parents. The refugees from their surrounding communities would donate us clothes to help us get on our feet. Clothes that are 3 generations. Holes in the clothes, holes in the shoes. Barely fits me. Holes that my mother would stay up late at night to fix. Shoes that she'll patch up so we can go to school. You know, I remember going to school. I was the face of this indigenous person. You know, and I was mocked. And I was picked on because I was poor and that my clothes smelled. So I was reminded every day how I didn't belong. It was a very hard time in my life, you know, growing up there. I want to put you on this bad day for me. You know, I was being picked on, I wasn't accepted. You know, we were called all sorts of names, and it was actually supported by the parents of these kids and the teacher because they didn't like refugees moving into their hometown. And second, I was the face of an unpopular war. It was very racist times in America back then. So, substitute teacher days are my worst days, you know. They try to pronounce my name. My name's pronounced LAM. And a lot of people can't pronounce that. With this persistent substitute teacher try to pronounce my name, and that egged on the class to make fun of me. Throw paper at me and tell me how much I don't belong here. You know, on this really bad day, the substitute teacher said, boy, you need to go down to the principal's office. And he looked at the bully who started, and he said, you too. So I did. I went down to the principal's office, and the principal told me to sit in one corner, and the boy's going to sit in another. He said, your parents can come pick you up. And, you know, my mother didn't drive, so I knew I'd be sitting here for a while. And then finally, the mother of the bully showed up, and she demanded to know what's going on. And substitute teacher said, your son called that boy right there a chink. You know, I don't know why it hit me harder that day than any other day. I'm reminded that every single day. But on this day, I was defeated. So the mother, she went and grabbed her son and she walked over to me, and I was looking at the ground, already defeated, you know. Demanding me to stare at her, so I stood up. And she said something that, you know, well, obviously I remember to this day. She said, my son is right. You don't belong here. You need to go back home to your country. I don't have a country. I cried so hard that day that I started hyperventilating, you know, and the principal said, boy, you're going to cry like that. You need to go out in the hallway. So I did. I went out and cried. My mother, she never picked me up. And that night, I sat in that room on this used mattress. And I reflected on this day. My mother must have sensed something's wrong, because she came in and she said something to me that will carry me through the special forces. She said to me, We will always have our bad days. Every one of us will have our bad days. But what did you learn from it? And who's the person you will become? I didn't understand. You know, all I felt was hate. All I saw was the insignificance in the world, you know, the worst in humanity. And I wanted to give up on life. I didn't know what to do, but I knew there was something stronger than hate. I just, at the time, couldn't put how can you at that young of age, 9? So I continued to go to school, continued to get picked on, and then at a certain point, my parents divorced. And eventually we moved into my future stepfather's home. He was Special Forces. He was a drill sergeant, you know. I went from 0 discipline to 150 miles of discipline, waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, raising the American flag, putting my hand over my heart, waking up to the ballad of the Special Forces. You know, and our life was so strict, and we had dress codes and academics and, you know, chores, many, many hours of chores. And a life that I never asked for, and I struggled. I struggled with this level of discipline. I'd never seen this level of discipline before. I struggled. I remember I came home one day, I was doing my homework, and my mother, a year passed since my parents' divorce. My mother came in with this cardboard box, and she said, "This is from your father, you know. Haven't heard from my father in over a year." I was in this place that I never asked for, struggling with this level of discipline. Now, my stepfather is a very loving man, very strict. He was a great guy, taught me what I need to learn, but I, as a human being, struggle with that level of discipline. So I was having a really hard time in my life, and now I was getting picked on, it wasn't accepted. I was really defeated, you know. My mother came in with the contents of this box. She said, "This is from your father." And I was so upset, I threw the box in a corner. Finished my homework, and I sat there and I looked at this box, and finally I built the courage to open up this box. And within the contents of this box, there was 4 VHS tapes, written in Vietnamese, dubbed. Couldn't read it back then, I was so young. So I randomly picked up a tape, I threw it in the VCR. It was the art of Budo, the combat side of being a samurai. Iaido, the way of sword and mind. Bushido, the way of a warrior. To live this life. To live this life of higher purpose. To not allow the conditions to influence you, because your why is so powerful. To live a life of Zen, Confucius. You know, you fast forward that, right? I was 11. 2 things happened to me that year to change the trajectory of my life. I was being picked on, not accepted, no friends. Reminding every day how poor I was, how indigenous I smelled. 11 years old, my uncle picked me up, and he must have seen something was wrong. He was taking me to Dairy Queen. My uncle asked me, just out of the blue, he said something to me that, well, obviously stuck to me. He said, "You know, too, there'll be days. There'll be days that people spit on you, and there'll be days that people flick you off and push you down. You need to ask yourself, do you want to be a fucking commando today? The days that your bones ache. When you feel like your bones are about to shatter because the sheer load that you're carrying on your back through training to form yourself into a weapon. When you want to quit, you need to ask yourself, do you want to be a fucking commando? When it's cold outside and it's 4 o'clock in the morning, you know the right thing to do is get up and run because you're a weapon that our country relies on. But it's comfortable and it's warm on this bed. You need to ask yourself, you want to be a fucking commando? You know, I was 11 years old. I was so taken back. Commando. the special forces. A life of discipline. A warrior's life to be stronger than the conditions and circumstances you present. A life of purpose. Commando.
Thank you so much to LAM for sharing this story with us. Such a treacherous story about making it over here and escaping war and such a terrible time in Vietnam. And I want to say a massive thank you to his family, for sharing this, for having us over at his house. We have so much more LAM content to come. I think around 6 months worth of content. So hit the notification bell to be notified of the LAM content. All of this was made possible with Mulliganbrothers.com and the support that you give us at Mulliganbrothers.com. The link is in the description and you can buy the t-shirts, the merchandise, and hopefully we'll be out in the States very shortly and with new products. So please keep your eyes peeled for that. If you want to go and show LAM some support as well, he has some amazing content on his YouTube, spreading more of his message. He has amazing content on his Instagram, and also all of his websites and socials are going to be linked down below. And there's some amazing resources there. What LAM does, RONIN TACTICS on Instagram does is nothing more than inspirational. Like it's some powerful stuff. And I'm really, really excited to be working with Tu. We have loads of projects ready to come out. So again, hit the notification bell, keep your eyes peeled. If you want to follow me on social media, it's at Jordan Mulligan Brother. See what I get up to on a day-to-day basis. I'm just about to go jump in some ice cold water. If you enjoyed the video, please comment, like, subscribe. Go inspire some change yourself, guys. Share this message. Have a blessed and productive day, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.